Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on the change of employer scheme. My name is Daniel. I'm a caseworker with Migrant Rights Centre Ireland, MRCI, and today's webinar is on the change of employer scheme. Now, just before we get started, and before I get into who MRCI is, you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there is a Q&A section. Please put any questions you have about the change of employer scheme or about the presentation into the chat. At the end of the webinar, we will have time to go through the questions. I will go through both questions that we received in advance of the webinar and also questions we received this evening and answer as many of them as I can. So please do feel free to put your questions into the chat. Okay, so sorry, 1 second. There we go. So let's get started. As I said, this evening's webinar is on the change of employer scheme, how it operates, and how to apply. So who is MRCI? For those of you here who don't know, so Migrant Rights Centre Ireland is a national organisation which works to advance the rights of migrant workers and their families at risk of exploitation, social exclusion and discrimination. We handle up to 3,500 cases a year through our information and support centre, and we offer a variety of information, support and advocacy on immigration and employment rights. And we've been taking a stand with migrants to tackle the root causes of inequality since 2001. Now, before we get into today's topic, I just want to read out a disclaimer that these materials have been prepared by the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland, MRCI, for information purposes only, with no guarantee as to accuracy or applicability to a particular set of circumstances. The materials are not intended and should not be considered to be legal advice. The information given may change from time to time and may be out of date. The Migrant Rights Centre Ireland disclaims any legal responsibility for the content or the accuracy of the information provided. MRCI is not a practicing law centre. So today's agenda, we're going to look at what the change of employer scheme is, what the eligibility criteria are in order to be able to apply. A very important aspect of the change of employer scheme, which we get a lot of questions on, is the SOC codes. So we'll go into what they are and why they're relevant. We'll look at the benefits of the change of employer scheme and also how to apply now that the new DETE portal has been released and the change of employer scheme is done through there. And then, as I said at the beginning, we will have time for a Q&A where I will go through the questions we were sent in advance. Thank you for sending those in, and any questions that are in the Q&A chat box. So once again, throughout the webinar today, please feel free to put your question down. So to begin, what is the change of employer scheme? So the Employment Permit Act of 2024 introduced the change of employer scheme in September of that year. What it essentially does is it allows people on employment permits in Ireland to change employers by applying to the DET after a period of 9 months has passed since commencing their first employment permit in the state. Uh, Previously, work permit holders could only apply for a new permit after 12 months, but this allows the permit holder to keep their existing permit, not have to pay for a new one, but to still be able to change employer. In terms of the eligibility criteria, so the person who is applying, the work permit holder, must be currently holding either a general or critical skills employment permit in order to be able to apply for the change of employer scheme. There needs to have had 9 months elapsed since the first employment permit in the state. Now, just to highlight that in the act itself, it says that it's 9 months since the first employment permit in the state. However, it's important to also note that in exceptional cases, for example, where there is exploitation at the workplace or mistreatment at the workplace, or major changes to your employment situation, say changes, contractual changes, or anything like that. For example, we say here the hours that you work are being significantly changed. You can apply in less than 9 months. So if any of these factors are an issue for you, don't hesitate to apply before the 9 months. You just need to provide a reason as to why you're applying. Now, it's very important as well that in order to be eligible for the scheme, Your permit still needs to be valid. That means it cannot be cancelled or expired. And it also needs to have at least 2 months validity remaining at the time of making the application. If it's going to expire in less than 2 months, then you cannot apply for the change of employer scheme. Now, the DET has confirmed that you must still be working when applying, as in working for your existing employer at the time. And it's very important. We do get issues like this coming into our information and support center. Do not resign before completing the change of employer process. We have seen some issues where an applicant might tell their employer before the scheme is processed that they are resigning, and the employer might cancel their permit. They're not supposed to do that, but it's a risk that's not worth taking. So you can inform your old employer that you are leaving and work your notice period after you receive the changed work permit. And also the new role must be within the same type of employment, or in other words, the same SOC code. Now, SOC code refers to the Standard Occupational Classification, or in other words, SOC. This is important because what it is it's essentially assigns all jobs a 4-digit code. It's to do with skills and qualifications that are needed for the job. But the reason it's important is deciding what jobs you can change to is based on these SOC codes. So to begin with general employment permit holders, there is very limited scope for change of the type of work that you're doing. You can apply to change employers within the type of employment that you are already in. So essentially, it means you must work in the same role that you're already in. So, I'll give an example in this next slide. So, as you can see here, there is a 3-digit SOC code, food preparation hospitality trades, which a general employment permit holder in this case can ignore, because what you need to look at is your 4-digit SOC code. So in this case, I use the example of chefs, which is SOC code 5434. So if you are looking at changing employer, you must have a job that is within that same 4-digit SOC code of chef. So if you, for example, are a sous chef or a chef de partie on a general employment permit, when you are doing the change of employer scheme, you can only change to other jobs that are within that 4-digit SOC code 5434. So again, you can change to a head chef or a commis chef, chef de partie, but that is the scope for change that you have as a general employment permit holder. Critical skills permit, the SOC codes still apply, but there's a little bit more scope for change because in this case, you are looking at the 3-digit SOC code, not the 4-digit SOC code. So on the example on the right-hand side here, you can see that there is a 3-digit SOC code 221 for health professionals. And you can see on the right-hand side of that, all of the roles that are included in health professionals. So in this case, for example, if you are a psychologist, so that's SOC code 2212, you can change to, for example, a podiatrist or chiropodist, which you can see 2218, or a medical practitioner 2211. So you as a critical skills permit holder, you can have a look at the list of jobs on the critical skills list, which is on the DET website, and you can find your 3-digit SOC code, and any jobs within that 3-digit code you can change to using the change of employer scheme. Now, in terms of the benefits of the change of employer scheme, the main ones are firstly, there's no reason needed to change employer after 9 months. You do not need to provide a reason. You don't have to explain why. If you have 9 months since your first permit, you can change employer. It's also a potential way out of an exploitative workplace or a workplace where there's mistreatment, even before the 9 month elapses. So long as you can explain the circumstances, they should approve your change of employer application. One big benefit is that no labor market needs test is required. So that's the requirement on a general work permit for the job to be advertised for 28 days before it's offered to you. In this case, because it's still the same existing permit, that's not required. There's also no fee for the change of employer process, and the processing times are relatively short. Depending on their backlog, we're seeing maybe like a month or two, sometimes even less. which is quicker than, say, other application types that people might be familiar with, such as, for example, reactivation. You can also use the change of employer scheme up to 3 times as a work permit holder. So if you change through the change of employer scheme and for whatever reason you need to change again, you can do that. As well as that, no documentation or information is needed from your old employer. So again, that's why we emphasize there's no need to resign in advance. You don't need to tell your employer in advance that you are using the change of employer scheme. The only documentation that is required is from your new employer. So again, if you have a notice period that you need to work, you can resign after you get the changed permit and then work your notice period. Just on what I mentioned before about the change of employer scheme being a way out of an exploitative workplace, I just would like to highlight, and you can see these when we will share the slides with everybody by email after the webinar. But below are the signs here that someone may be a victim of labor trafficking in Ireland. So if you see in these signs, which are labeled coercion, deception, exploitation, if you see someone you know or yourself that is meeting these signs, or even if you don't meet the conditions of labor trafficking, but maybe you recognize some of these signs, such as, for example, low or no salary or excessive working hours, withholding of wages, or if you feel like you're being exploited or mistreated at the workplace, we just would highly advise that you contact Migrant Rights Centre Ireland. We can at least provide confidential advice and information on your rights and what options you might have, such as, for example, the change of employer scheme, but also other options that are available as well. In terms of making an application, obviously I'm going to talk about how to apply using the new DT portal. But before that, it's important to know, I suppose, what documentation is required uh, in order to be able to apply for the change of employer scheme. It's not an awful lot. But obviously, a new employer is required first and foremost, who needs to create an account on the DT portal, as well as you as the employee, which I'll go into a bit later. But just to emphasize, both the employer and the employee need to create an account on the portal because both parties are involved in the process. Now, in terms of documentation that's needed, you can see here a copy of a new contract of employment with your new employer, which is both signed by the employer and employee. Now, the documents below that are all documents that are required from the employer. So a statement issued by revenue about monthly returns for the last 3 months, that's something the employer needs to provide. Excuse me. And also, if the employer is operating a restaurant business, there's some additional information required. Now, you can find this on the DT website, and also, as I said, we will share the slides so you can have a look at this. But all of these documents are asked for from your employer when they're filling out their section of the change of employer form. You, as the employee, do not need to provide statements from revenue or anything like that. That's for the employer to provide. Now, as I said, since April 2025, the DET, the Department of Enterprise, has released their own portal through which the change of employer scheme, among other things, is operated through. So, as I said, the first thing that both the employee and the employer must do is make an account on the website. I have the link there. There will be a useful slides link when we share the slides with everybody, so I will include the link there. So you need to go onto this website, create an account. Now we have seen have been some issues with creating an account through the system. It's still new, so there may be some problems or glitches. So if that's the case, you can email this email epos@enterprise.gov.ie, and they should be able to help you with your issue. Just tell them what the problem is. They should be able to resolve it and get you into the portal. In terms of the actual steps to apply, so as I said, step one is that both the employer and the employee create an account on the DET portal. Once that's completed, now the DET recommends for ease that the employer begins the process, not the employee. However, it should be noted that either party can start the process, can press the transfer button and begin it. Both of you will have to answer your questions anyway. It's just a question of who begins the process first. So if it's the employer needs to press the transfer permit button, which can be found above the permits grid on the home page. You'll see I'll have some screenshots in the next slides just to show you what it looks like. If the employee begins the process, they must press the action button next to their active permit, and then there'll be a drop-down menu with a transfer button available. Once the process is started, both the employer and the employee will need to log on to their accounts and answer all the required questions and attach supporting documents. Again, in terms of supporting documents, most of that is for the employer. I am aware, as far as we understand, that they seem to be asking for new photos as well for the employment permit at this point, but otherwise there isn't really much that's required for the employee. Even most of the questions are kind of basic questions about yourself and whether you're still in Ireland, whereas the employer needs to answer just a few more questions about if they're meeting, for example, the 50-50 rule and stuff like that. Then once all that is done, you submit the application and wait until the permit has been changed. It should be noted that an employee legally cannot start working with the new employer until the permit has been changed and issued. But once that has been issued, the employee must start with the new employer within 1 month of the changed permit being issued. So just to show you what this looks like, if the employee is beginning the process, you can see here step one. When you log on, you'll see this permit section with your active work permit. On the right hand side where it says actions, you press that button and there's the drop down menu and you press the transfer button. After that, you can see that it asks you please select the permit type you would like to apply for. That's a drop-down menu, but there are no other options other than the permit that you have. And transfer reason, which is required if you are applying within less than 9 months, but if it's after 9 months, you don't have to explain why you are changing employer. And if an employer is beginning the process, they log on to their account, and above the permit section, you can see in the red square, there is a transfer permit button. So they press that and then start to fill out all the information. But as I said, anyway, regardless of who starts it, both the employer and employee will need to log in at some point to the account to complete their side of it. So that's all the information regarding the change of employer scheme. Now, I just would like to highlight that our Information Support Center is currently running on an appointment basis. But if you'd like to speak to our caseworkers, if you have questions, further questions about the change of employer scheme, anything maybe specific to your situation, we got some questions, for example, that aren't related to change of employer, which we can't answer today. But if you feel like your question hasn't been answered or you're having an issue with immigration or employment, please do contact us. Best way to do so is through a contact page on our web form. Again, I will put this into the useful links when I share the slides. And on the right hand side, you can see just fill out your details and put in as much detail as you can about your query or your issue. And one of our caseworkers will get back to you as soon as possible. As well, for regular updates, please do follow us on social media. We post a lot of information about any changes to, let's say, legislation, or especially for work permit holders or any issues around immigration or employment. Feel free to follow us on social media. And also, if you'd like to get involved, please, you can join our campaigns, sign up as a supporter, or donate on our website. The links are there. So that's the end of the information session here. Thank you very much for listening. 1 second.